Chapter 33. The London night was cold and damp, a clinging mist covering the city's streets. Jade and David moved through the shadows, their footsteps echoing on the rain-slicked cobblestones. They were ghosts in this ancient city, hunters stalking their prey through a realm where secrets lurked in every darkened alley and shadowed doorway. The weight of history pressed on them, the whispers of long-dead kings and poets in the stones beneath their feet. But Jade and David pushed forward, driven by a desperate need to uncover the truth behind the Illuminated Order. They spent days preparing for this moment, poring over maps and intelligence reports, gathering every scrap of information they could about their enemy's stronghold. As they approached the building where the secret meeting was taking place, everything relied on their ability to blend in, to become one with the darkness that covered the city. Jade underwent a stunning transformation for this mission. Gone was the hard-edged reporter who chased down leads and faced threats. In her place was a figure of aristocratic grace and poise, a woman who could move through the highest levels of society without raising an eyebrow. Her gown was a masterpiece of midnight silk and lace, hugging her curves and trailing behind her like a shadow. Her hair was swept up in a braided bun, exposing the swan-like curve of her neck and the glittering diamonds at her throat. But beneath the finery and the polish, Jade's heart raced with anticipation and fear. They were walking into the lion's den. The slightest misstep could expose them and bring the full wrath of the Order down on their heads. Beside her, David was a man of coiled energy and quiet strength. His eyes surveyed the shadows for any hint of danger. He wore a tailored tuxedo like a second skin, the picture of refined wealth and power. Together, they ascended the steps of the building, their hearts pounding in sync as they prepared to infiltrate the Order's inner sanctum. The fate of the world hung in the balance, and only they could prevent the unthinkable from coming to pass. As they stepped over the threshold and into the light of the ballroom, they were no longer mortals, but players in a game of cosmic proportions. The secrets they uncovered tonight could change the course of history, but only if they could survive long enough to bring them to light. At the front of the room, a stage was set up, a podium flanked by towering screens that pulsed with an otherworldly light. Jade looked around the room, taking in every detail, every face, searching for any sign of the Grand Master or his inner circle. And then she saw it. A small, black laptop resting on the podium. This was what they'd come for. It was the key to unlocking the Order's darkest secrets. The laptop would contain the files, the plans, and the evidence they needed to expose the conspiracy to the world. With a subtle nod to David, Jade began to move through the crowd, her smile fixed firmly in place. She laughed at the right moments, clinked glasses with the right people, all the while edging closer and closer to the podium. As she approached, a small group of guards stood nearby, their eyes watchful and alert. She would only have one chance, one moment to make her move. A commotion broke out on the other side of the room. A drunk guest, stumbling and slurring, drawing the attention of the guards. Jade seized her opportunity, darting forward with lightning speed. Her fingers closed around a small flash drive sticking out the side of the laptop, yanking it in one smooth motion. She tucked it beneath her gown, her heart racing as she turned and made her escape. As the mumbles of conversation died away and a quietness fell over the crowd, a man stepped out onto the stage, his face obscured by a glittery golden mask. "Brothers and sisters," he said, his voice deep and resonant, vibrating off the vaulted ceilings of the hall. "We stand on the threshold of a new era, a time of great change and upheaval. And it is our duty, as the guardians of the ancient wisdom, to guide humanity through the darkness and into the light." As he spoke, the screens behind him came to life, a dizzying array of images and symbols flashing across their surface. Jade and David watched in mounting horror as the Illuminated Order's plans for global domination unfolded before their eyes. There were maps of the world, with swathes of territory marked in red, indicating the areas the Order sought to control. There were images of weapons and technology, of armies and mercenaries, all bearing the Order's distinctive emblem. And at the center of it all, a single, chilling phrase: the Great Reset. Jade and David looked at each other. They were witnessing something monumental, a plan that threatened to reshape human society. As the presentation continued, the speaker outlined the Order's vision for a new world order, a global government that would unite all of humanity under a single banner. There would be no more nations, no more borders, no more wars or conflicts. But there would also be no more freedom, no more individual liberty or self-determination. The Illuminated Order would rule supreme, a benevolent dictatorship that would guide humanity towards its ultimate destiny. They listened in horror as the speaker described the Order's plans for mass surveillance, for mind control and genetic engineering, for a world where every aspect of human life would be monitored and controlled by the Order's all-seeing eye. As the presentation drew to a close, the speaker's voice rose to a crescendo. "The time has come, my brothers and sisters," he said, his eyes blazing with a fanatical light. "The time for the Great Reset, for the birth of a new world order, and we, the Illuminated, will be the ones to lead humanity into the glorious future that awaits." As the crowd erupted into applause, Jade and David slipped out of the hall. They stumbled on a truth that could change the course of history, a plan so audacious and far-reaching that it defied belief. Chapter 34. The rain fell in sheets as Jade and David raced through the streets of London, their breath coming in uneven gasps and their hearts pounding with fear and exhilaration. They'd done it. They'd infiltrated the secret meeting and witnessed firsthand the chilling scope of the Order's plans for global domination. As they fled through the night, they knew they weren't out of danger. The Order's security would be searching for them, scouring the city with a fine-toothed comb, looking for any sign of the intruders who dared to breach their inner sanctum. Jade's gown was soaked through, the delicate lace clinging to her body like a second skin. Her hair had come loose from its tight bun, falling in damp tendrils around her face. But she barely noticed the discomfort. She was focused solely on the task at hand. At her side, David moved with the fluid grace of a trained operative. He shed his tuxedo jacket, the white dress shirt beneath sticking to his muscular frame. As they rounded a corner, the sound of footsteps behind them could be heard in the distance, the heavy tread of boots on pavement. They exchanged a glance and quickened their pace, their shoes pounding against the slick cobblestones. As they ran, Jade's hand remained clasped around the small, innocuous-looking flash drive she managed to snatch from the podium right before the presentation. It was a tiny thing, no bigger than a thumbnail, but it contained the key to unlocking the Illuminated Order's darkest secrets. They planned for this moment, studied the layout of the city, and mapped out their escape route in meticulous detail. But now, as they fled through the twisting alleys and narrow side streets, they realized no amount of planning could have prepared them for the reality of being hunted by the Order's security force. They turned down a narrow alleyway, and the sound of a car engine roared behind them, the screeching of tires on wet pavement. They glanced over their shoulders and saw a black sedan barreling down on them, its headlights cutting through the rain like twin laser beams. With a burst of speed, they sprinted towards the end of the alleyway, their hearts pounding and lungs burning with the effort. The car was getting closer, the sound of its engine growling louder with each passing second. As they reached the end of the alley, a narrow, almost invisible gap between two buildings became visible, a tiny sliver of space just wide enough for them to squeeze through. Without hesitation, they dove for the gap, their bodies twisting and contorting as they forced themselves through the narrow opening, the rough brick scraping against their skin, tearing at their clothes. As the black sedan reached the mouth of the alley, its headlights sweeping across the empty space where they'd been just moments before, Jade and David emerged on the other side, their chests heaving with exertion and their faces streaked with sweat and grime. They paused, their eyes meeting in a silent moment of relief and triumph. They'd done it. They escaped the Order's clutches and made it out of the city with the evidence they needed to expose the nefarious schemes. Chapter 35. The plane touched down on the tarmac, jolting Jade and David back to reality. As the aircraft taxied to the gate, a sense of relief washed over them. They made it back to the United States, putting an ocean between themselves and the Illuminated Order's clutches. The adrenaline rush of their narrow escape slowly began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of unease about the challenges that lay ahead. It wasn't until they arrived at Jade's apartment they realized the full extent of the danger they were in. The door had been forced open, the lock splintered and broken. Inside, the place ransacked, drawers and cabinets overturned, papers and belongings scattered across the floor like confetti. Jade's heart dropped as she looked over the destruction. Someone was here, searching for something. She had a strong feeling of who was behind it. Beside her, David's jaw clenched. He'd seen this before, witnessed firsthand the ruthless efficiency of the Order's operatives. They moved through the apartment. Everywhere they looked, they saw signs of the intrusion, the violation of privacy and safety. When they entered the bedroom, the true horror of the situation played out. There, on the bed, lay a single piece of paper, a message scrawled in harsh, angular handwriting. "We have your mother, Jade. If you want to see her alive again, bring us the flash drive. You have 24 hours. Jade's pulse quickened and her muscles tightened. Her mother, her kind, gentle mother, was in the hands of the Illuminated Order. And it was all because of her, because of the choices she made. David moved closer, his hand finding hers, his fingers lacing through hers. He pulled her against his shoulder, and they stood in silence, not knowing what to say. Jade clung to him like a lifeline. They knew the Order would stop at nothing to protect their secrets, to maintain their grip on power. But this was beyond anything they ever imagined. The sun had long since set over the city of Washington, D.C. Jade and David huddled together in a motel room on the outskirts of town, their faces drawn and haggard from the events of the past few days. They'd been on the run ever since they discovered the message, ever since they realized Jade's mother was being held hostage by the same people they'd been trying to expose. They went underground, moving from one place to another, always looking over their shoulders for any sign of pursuit. The Order's operatives were out there, searching. But in the midst of fear and desperation, they weren't alone. They had allies out there, people who believed in their cause and were willing to risk everything to help them. It was late at night when the burner phone rang. David reached for it. "Hello? David, it's Reynolds." The voice on the other end of the line was familiar. Reynolds was one of their closest allies in the fight against the Illuminated Order, a man of integrity and courage who risked his own career to help them uncover the truth. "Reynolds, thank God," David said. "We need your help. They've taken Jade's mother, and we don't know what to do." There was a pause, a moment of heavy silence that seemed to stretch on for an eternity. And then, Reynolds spoke again. "Listen to me," he said. David put him on the speakerphone. "I've been suspended, but that doesn't mean I'm out of the game. I've been doing some digging on my own, and I think I might have a lead on where they're holding Jade's mother." A surge of adrenaline rushed through Jade's veins. "Where?" "It's a compound on the outskirts of the city," Reynolds replied. "Heavily guarded, off the grid. But I got a plan to get us inside." "What kind of plan?" David asked. Reynolds hesitated, the sound of his breathing heavy and labored over the phone. "The kind of plan that could get us all killed," he said. "But it's the only way to save Jade's mother and take down the Order once and for all." Jade and David exchanged a glance, their eyes locked in a silent moment of communication. "We're in," Jade said, her words ringing out like a clarion call in the darkness. "Whatever it takes, we'll do it." "I knew you would," Reynolds said. "Meet me at the old abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. We got work to do." The line went dead, leaving Jade and David alone in the silence of the motel room. Chapter 36. The abandoned warehouse was a decaying behemoth of rusted metal and shattered windows. Jade and David stood at the entrance, the cool night air biting at their skin as they hesitated, their eyes searching the surroundings for any sign of life. Jade pulled her jacket tighter around her body, a shiver running down her spine that had little to do with the chill. "I don't like this," she said. "Why would Reynolds want to meet us here, in the middle of nowhere? It doesn't feel right. I know it seems strange, but we have to trust him. Reynolds has always been on our side, even when it meant putting his own neck on the line." Jade shook her head. "But what if this is a trap? What if the Order got to him, turned him against us? We've seen how far their reach extends, how deep their influence goes." David placed a hand on her shoulder. "Reynolds is one of the good guys. I've known him for years, and he's never once let me down." You remember the Holbrook case, back when I first started at the agency? Jade nodded, her mind flashing back to the story David told her long ago, in a rare moment of vulnerability. The one where you were undercover, infiltrating that weapons ring? That one, David said, a wistful smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. I was in over my head, about to be exposed by one of the higher-ups. I thought I was done for, that I'd never make it out alive. But then Reynolds showed up out of nowhere, posing as a corrupt cop on the take. He convinced them I was his informant, that I was feeding him intel on their operation. He risked his own life to save yours, even though he barely knew you? That's the kind of man he is, Jade. Loyal to a fault, willing to put everything on the line for the people he believes in. And right now, he believes in us, in the truth we're fighting to expose. Jade took a deep breath, the knot of tension in her gut loosening. Okay, she said, let's do it. But if anything feels off, if there's even a hint of danger, we get out fast. Agreed? Agreed, David said. With one last look at the deserted street behind them, Jade and David stepped forward. The atmosphere inside was thick and musty, the scent of old machinery and stale dust hanging in the air. The only light came from a few scattered fluorescent bulbs. In the center of the room stood Detective Reynolds, his face lined with exhaustion, and his eyes burning with a fierce determination. He looked like a man who'd been through hell and back, a man who'd seen things that no one should ever have to witness. Glad you could make it, he said, his voice echoing in the empty space. I know this isn't exactly the most inviting place, but it's the only safe haven I could find. Jade checked the room for any sign of danger. What's the plan? She asked. How are we going to find my mother and take down the order? Reynolds motioned for them to follow him, leading them deeper into the warehouse. I've been doing some digging, he said, and I think I've found a way to infiltrate the compound where they're holding your mother. He led them to a makeshift command center, a tangle of wires and computer screens that looked like something out of a spy movie. I've been monitoring their communications, his fingers flying across the keyboard, and I think I've found a weakness in their security protocols. What kind of weakness? David asked. Reynolds pointed to a schematic of the compound, his finger tracing a series of tunnels and passageways. There's an old sewer system that runs beneath the compound. If we can access it, we might be able to sneak in undetected. And once we're inside, Jade questioned. We find your mother, Reynolds said, and we take down the order from the inside. Over the next few hours, they pored over the details and surveillance footage. They were up against impossible odds. The Illuminated Order was a force to be reckoned with. As the night wore on, they began to formulate a plan. It was a plan born of desperation and hope, a last-ditch effort to turn the tide of the battle. But as they looked around the room at each other, they knew they were in this together. They would stand united in the face of the darkness. Chapter 37. The 50-foot walls of the compound rose from the mist-shrouded forest like a malevolent specter. Perched atop a remote hill in the heart of the Chattahoochee-Oconee National Forest, the facility was a hidden stronghold where unspeakable deeds were rumored to take place. Wrought iron gates emblazoned with the Order's symbol opened to reveal a palatial mansion of smooth cream stone, crowned with gleaming copper domes. Manicured lawns and pristine gardens surround the compound, dotted with fountains and statues. Jade, David, and Detective Reynolds crouched at the edge of the tree line, their breath frosting in the chill autumn air as they surveyed the imposing structure before them. The compound was ringed by a double layer of high, reinforced concrete walls, topped with coils of razor wire that shined in the moonlight. Security cameras and motion sensors dotted the perimeter, their unblinking eyes surveying for any sign of intrusion. I count at least a dozen armed guards, Reynolds said, his voice low as he peered through a pair of high-powered binoculars. And those are just the ones we can see. God knows how many more are waiting inside. We're in over our heads, aren't we? Jade whispered. How are we supposed to get past all of that, let alone find my mother and get her out alive? David patted her back. We'll find a way, Jade, he said. We didn't come this far to give up. Your mother's counting on us, and we won't let her down. Reynolds nodded. The kid's right. He tucked the binoculars back into his bag. We've got surprise on our side, and the truth. That's more than the Order's ever had to face before. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded map, spreading it out on the damp ground before them. Now, listen up. I've been studying this place for weeks, looking for any weakness we can exploit. There's a drainage tunnel on the eastern side of the compound here. He tapped a finger on the map, indicating a small, easily overlooked feature. A drainage tunnel, Jade said. Won't that be guarded too? Reynolds allowed himself a small, tight smile. That's the beauty of it. The tunnel is so narrow, the Order probably doesn't even realize it's a potential point of entry. It's not on any of their official blueprints or security plans. So we sneak in through the tunnel, make our way to the main building, and find Jade's mother before anyone realizes we're there. It's risky, but it might work, David said. It's our best shot, but we'll have to move fast and stay low. Reynolds replied. Once we're inside, there's no telling what kind of resistance we'll face. Chapter 38. As they made their way inside, it was pitch black. The only light came from the beams of their flashlights, cutting through the darkness like knives. They moved slowly, and without warning, all hell broke loose. The first shot came from above. A burst of gunfire sent them diving for cover. Jade rolled behind a pile of rubble, her heart pounding as she tried to get a bead on their attackers. It's a trap! They knew we were coming! Fuck! Reynolds cursed under his breath. We have to get out of here, he said. We're sitting ducks. As the words left his lips, a man emerged from the darkness. A man clad in black tactical gear, holding an assault rifle. He moved with the grace and precision of a trained killer, his eyes cold and merciless behind the visor of his helmet. Surrender now, he said, his voice distorted by the electronic filter of his mask. And maybe we'll let you live. A surge of anger coursed through Jade's veins, a white-hot fury that burned away the fear and doubt. She rose to her feet, her gun held steady in her hands as she stared down the barrel of the assassin. Go to hell, she said, her finger tightening on the trigger. The assassin moved with blinding speed, his rifle coming up to bear on Jade's chest. But as he fired, David was there, tackling him to the ground. They rolled across the floor, trading blows and struggling for control of the rifle. Reynolds joined them, his own weapon forgotten, as he threw himself into the melee. Jade watched as the three men fought, their bodies a tangle of limbs and weapons. She had to do something, had to find a way to turn the tide of the battle before it was too late. A flash of metal in the assassin's hand, the sparkle of a knife blade in the dimmed light. Time slowed down, the world narrowing to a single point of focus as Jade raised her gun and fired. The bullet struck the assassin in the chest, a spray of blood and bone erupting from the wound. He staggered back, his eyes wide with shock and pain, and then he fell, his body hitting the ground with a dull thud. David and Reynolds struggled to their feet, their faces streaked with blood and sweat. They looked at Jade, realizing what she'd done. As they tried to catch their breath, more gunfire erupted through the factory. They kept moving. They had to find Jade's mother and get out of there before reinforcements arrived. As they were about to give up hope, a soft, muffled cry came from somewhere up ahead. Mom! Jade called out. Mom! Are you there? There was a moment of silence. From the shadows, she emerged. A woman with long, dark hair and a face lined with exhaustion and fear. Jade, she said, her eyes wide with disbelief. Is that really you? Jade rushed forward, tears blurring her vision as she dropped to her knees beside her mother. She worked to untie the restraints, her fingers fumbling in her haste. It's me, Mom. I'm here. I'm going to get you out of here. Jade's mother grabbed her daughter's hands, squeezing them with a fierce intensity. I knew you'd come for me, she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. I never lost faith. Jade pulled her mother into a tight hug, burying her face in the crook of her neck as sobs racked her body. The weight of the past few months, the fear, the desperation, the pursuit of the truth. It all came crashing down in that moment. I'm so sorry, Jade choked out. I'm sorry it took me so long. Her mother held her close, stroking her hair with a soothing touch. You have nothing to apologize for, my brave girl. You risked everything to save me. I'm so proud of you. They clung to each other, savoring the bittersweet reunion. But the urgency of their situation soon reasserted itself. Jade pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "We have to go." With a nod, her mother struggled to her feet. Together, they made their way out, Jade's arm wrapped protectively around her mother's waist. Chapter 39. President Adrian Blackwell sat at his desk in the Oval Office, his hands clasped in front of him as he faced the two junior members of the Illuminated Order, Victoria and Jameson, who were standing over him. "Mr. President, I believe we've made ourselves clear," Victoria said, leaning in close. "The Order's policies must be implemented without delay." President Blackwell took a deep breath, trying to maintain his composure. "I understand your position, Victoria. But these policies, they're extreme. The consequences could be devastating." Jameson's stare was icy. "The consequences of inaction would be far worse, Mr. President. The Order has the nation's best interests at heart." The president shifted in his seat. The Order's reputation for ruthlessness was known, and the thought of crossing them made him nauseous. But he had a duty to the American people, and he couldn't ignore it. "I was elected to serve the people, not the Order," the president said. "I need more time to consider the ramifications." Victoria grinned. "Selected, Mr. President. Never forget that. And time is a luxury we don't have. The Order has been patient, but that patience is wearing thin," she said. "We know things about you, things that could ruin you. It would be a shame if certain secrets were to come to light." President Blackwell fought to keep his expression neutral. "Are you threatening me?" Victoria smiled. "We prefer to think of it as a friendly reminder of where your loyalties should lie." The president rose from his chair, the vein in his neck pulsating. "I won't be bullied into submission. I need to do what's right for the American people." Jameson stepped closer. "And what about what's right for your family? It would be tragic if something were to happen to them." The president shifted in his seat. Images of his wife and children flashed through his mind. Any harm caused to them was unbearable. He sank back into his chair, his shoulders slumped, and he shook his head. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. Victoria and Jameson exchanged a glance. "I'm glad we could reach an understanding, Mr. President," Victoria said, smiling. "The Order will be in touch with further instructions." As the two turned to leave, the president buried his face in his hands. He'd sworn to protect and serve the nation, but now he found himself a pawn in a game far more dangerous than he ever imagined. The door closed behind Victoria and Jameson, leaving the president alone in the Oval Office. From this moment forward, his every move would be watched, his every decision scrutinized by the forces that pulled the strings of power. The future of the nation and the safety of his own family was at stake. Chapter 40. Jade pushed back in her chair, rubbing her tired eyes as she let out a heavy sigh. "There's so much here. Financial records, meeting minutes, encrypted messages. It's like trying to piece together a million-piece puzzle without the picture on the box. The answers we need are in here somewhere. I can feel it." David's eyes widened, and he sat up straight in his seat. "Wait a minute, look at this." He turned the screen towards Jade, pointing to a series of emails. "These messages are talking about a meeting, a gathering of some kind. And look at the location. The Swiss Alps." Jade reached into her pocket and pulled out the black business card Victoria slipped her during their encounter at the gala. "The card," she whispered, her fingers tracing over the embossed lettering. "I think it's an invitation to this meeting." She flipped the card over and saw the address scrawled on the back in elegant silver script. "Davos, Switzerland. That's where they're holding the meeting." "This could be it, Jade. The opportunity we've been waiting for." "We have to go. We need to be at that meeting, no matter what it takes." Jade stood up, her mind already racing with the logistics of their trip. "I'll book the flights and make the arrangements. You start packing and gathering whatever equipment we might need." Chapter 41. Agent James Ashford strode into the briefing room at MI6 headquarters, His crisp suit and confident demeanor was confirmation to his years of experience in the field. He took a seat at the long table, nodding to his colleagues as they filed in. At the head of the table was Margaret Brentwood, the MI6 section chief, her face lit up by the glow of the large screen behind her. "Good morning, everyone," Margaret said, tapping a button on the remote in her hand. The screen flashed to life, displaying a map of the Swiss Alps. "Our top priority today is the mission involving Jade Rose and David Montgomery." James's interest piqued at the mention of the American journalist. "What's the situation, Margaret?" he asked. "Our sources indicate Jade and David are heading to the Swiss Alps, specifically to Davos, Switzerland," Margaret explained. "We believe they're following a lead related to the Illuminated Order." She clicked the remote, and the screen zoomed in on a satellite image of a sprawling mountain compound. "This is the Rettenberg estate, owned by a shell corporation with ties to the Order. We suspect it may be a key location in their operations." James nodded, his mind already working. He'd been keeping tabs on Jade's investigation into the Order. He knew if she was personally pursuing a lead, it must be significant. Margaret continued, "We believe they may be heading into a dangerous situation." "And you want me to provide support?" James asked. "Exactly," Margaret confirmed. "Your experience in the field make you the ideal candidate to assist them. We need you to reach out to Jade and ensure their safety." James nodded. "I have no doubt you'll find a way. I'll do whatever it takes to ensure the success of this mission and protect our allies." Margaret gave him a nod of approval. "I know you will. The stakes are high, and the outcome of this operation could have far-reaching consequences. We're counting on you." As the briefing drew to a close, James stood, ready to spring into action. Time was of the essence, and he needed to make contact with Jade as soon as possible. With a final nod to Margaret, he strode out of the room, his mind already formulating plans and contingencies. Chapter 42. The Swiss Alps was a vast expanse of snow-capped peaks and pristine valleys stretching out as far as the eye could see. Jade and David stood at the edge of a clifftop, the fierce winds whipping at their hair and clothes as they observed the breathtaking vista. "You sure this is the right place?" Jade asked, her voice barely audible over the howling of the wind. David nodded, his eyes narrowing as he consulted the GPS coordinates on his smartphone. "The coordinates lead right to this spot. The Order's leadership is set to convene here in less than 24 hours. The wind picked up. Jade pulled her coat tighter as she stared out over the rugged terrain. "It's so remote," she said. "The perfect place for a secret meeting." "We have to find a way inside. Stop them before it's too late." They made their way down the narrow, winding path that led to the valley floor, snow crunching under their boots, their breath clouding in the frigid air. The only sound was the wind, a mournful howl that vibrated off the peaks and through the deep, shadowed ravines. As they approached the coordinates, a sprawling compound nestled in the heart of the valley came into view. "There it is," David said. "The belly of the beast." Jade searched the perimeter of the compound for any sign of weakness, any chink in the Order's armor. "We need to find a way inside," she said. They spent the next few hours scouting the compound, studying its layout and defenses with a meticulous eye. They were up against an intimidating enemy. The Illuminated Order would have spared no expense in securing their most important meeting place. As the sun set over the mountains, long shadows danced across the valley floor. They found what they were looking for: a small, unguarded service entrance on the far side of the compound, hidden behind a stand of snow-laden pines. "That's our way in," David said. "We'll wait until nightfall, then make our move." Jade agreed. They were about to walk into the danger zone without any guarantee of making it out alive. As the last rays of the sun disappeared behind the mountains, they made their final preparations, checking their weapons and equipment with a practiced eye. They would only have one chance to get this right. The slightest mistake could mean the difference between life and death. As the night closed in around them and the stars began to shine in the clear, cold sky, they made their move. Approaching the service entrance, soft mumbling of voices came from inside, the sound of the Order's leadership gathering for their meeting. Jade and David's eyes locked in a silent moment of communication. This was it, the moment they'd been waiting for. The moment they'd finally come face to face with the enemy they'd been fighting for so long. With a final nod, they pushed open the heavy double doors and stepped into the room. What they saw would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The room was huge, its walls draped in rich textiles, and the floor inlaid with intricate patterns of gold and silver. At the far end of the room, a massive stone altar dominated the space, its surface stained with dark, rusty, dried blood. And there, standing before the altar, was a man that could only be the Illuminated Order's Grand Master. He was tall and gaunt, his skin pale and translucent beneath the light of the candles that lined the room. His eyes were a piercing blue, cold and calculating as they swept over the assembled crowd. And what a crowd it was. Jade and David recognized some of the faces instantly. Politicians and CEOs, celebrities and royalty, all of them dressed in the same black robes and wearing the same expression of rapt attention. But it was the person on the altar that drew their gaze. A young woman with long dark hair and a face twisted in terror and pain. She was naked and bound, her wrists and ankles tied to the four corners of the altar with thick ropes. The Grand Master began to speak as Jade and David looked on. "Brothers and sisters," he said, "we gather here tonight to offer a sacrifice to the great god Baphomet, to renew our vows of loyalty and obedience to the Illuminated Order." The crowd muttered in assent, their eyes glued to the altar and the struggling form of the young woman. Bile rose up in Jade's throat. A wave of nausea and revulsion threatened to overwhelm her. But she forced it down, forced herself to watch as the Grand Master raised a shining silver dagger above his head. "With this sacrifice," he declared, his voice rising, "we bind ourselves to the will of the Order, to the great work that we have undertaken. We offer this vessel as a symbol of our devotion, a tribute to the power that we wield over the world of men." And then, with a single brutal motion, he brought the dagger down, plunging it into the young woman's chest. A sound of pure, unadulterated agony bounced off the walls and through the souls of all who heard it. As the life drained from her body and the blood poured from her wounds, the Grand Master continued to speak. "Behold the power of the Illuminated Order," he said. "Behold the destiny that awaits all who oppose us. We are the future, the true masters of the world, and all who stand in our way shall be crushed beneath our heel." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, their voices rising in twisted celebration. Jade and David could only watch in silent horror. They had to make a move, had to find a way to stop this madness before it consumed the entire world. But in that moment, confronted with the full, terrifying scope of the Order's power and depravity, doubt consumed them, a sinking fear that they might already be too late. With heavy hearts and trembling hands, they turned to leave, to slip back into the shadows and regroup for the battles to come. But as they did, a voice stopped them dead in their tracks. "Leaving already?" The Grand Master's voice cut through the commotion. "And just when things were getting interesting." Jade and David stopped in their tracks, their hearts pounding as they turned to face the altar. The Grand Master stood before them, his eyes fixed on theirs. His smile was one of cold satisfaction, a predator who had just cornered his prey. "Did you really think you could sneak into our private meeting undetected?" he asked. "You've clearly underestimated the Illuminated Order's capabilities. We have eyes and ears everywhere, and nothing happens within these walls without our knowledge." The Grand Master took a step forward, his stare never wavering. "Your little infiltration attempt was doomed from the start. We've been aware of your presence since the moment you set foot in this building. But we wanted to see how far you'd go, how much you'd dare to uncover." He spread his arms wide, gesturing to the room around them. "And now, here you are, witnessing the true power and influence of the Order. But don't mistake this for an invitation. You've stumbled into a world you can barely comprehend, and there will be consequences for your actions." Jade and David stood their ground. They were outnumbered and outmaneuvered by the Order's members. But they couldn't let the Grand Master's words shake their resolve. They'd come too far, sacrificed too much, to back down now. "You may think you have us cornered," Jade said, her voice steady despite the fear rushing through her veins. "But the truth will always find a way to come out. Your secrets, your lies, Your manipulations, they won't stay hidden forever. And we won't stop until the world knows the truth about the Illuminated Order." The Grand Master let out a harsh laugh, shaking his head in mock pity. "Ah, the naive youth. You still believe in the power of truth, in the ability of the masses to rise up against their masters. But you fail to grasp the true nature of power. It's not about truth or justice or any of those lofty ideals you cling to. It's about control, plain and simple. And the Illuminated Order has been controlling the levers of power for centuries." He took another step forward, his eyes boring into Jade's. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into. No idea of the forces you're trying to oppose. But you'll learn soon enough. And when you do, you'll realize just how futile your little crusade really is." Jade and David could only stare. They were in over their heads. They walked into a trap from which there might be no escape. The Grand Master was right about one thing. They stumbled into something far beyond their worst imaginings, a conspiracy that threatened to consume the entire world in darkness and despair. "You're nothing but insignificant specks in the grand scheme of things. We will not be thwarted by the likes of you." David reached into his pocket and pulled out a small spherical object. Before anyone could react, he tossed it at the ground, and a blinding flash of light filled the room, accompanied by a deafening bang. Chaos erupted as the members of the Order stumbled and shouted in confusion, disoriented by the flashbang. Jade and David seized the opportunity, pushing through the large crowd and racing towards the exit. "Stop them!" The Grandmaster's voice cut through the commotion. "Don't let them escape!" They ran through the winding corridors of the compound, hearts thumping. The footsteps and angry shouts of their pursuers grew louder. They burst through a set of heavy double doors and found themselves in a courtyard. The cold night air slapping their faces as they ran, searching for a way out. A black helicopter descended from the sky, its rotor blades whipping the air into a frenzy. The door slid open, revealing the familiar face of their MI6 contact. "Come on!" he shouted over the noise. "We don't have much time." Jade and David raced towards the helicopter, their pursuers hot on their heels. They jumped inside, and the door slid shut behind them just as a hail of bullets pinged off the armored exterior. The helicopter's rotor blades whirred, kicking up a swirl of snow and debris. Jade collapsed against David, her body shaking of exhaustion and adrenaline. She could feel his heart racing beneath her cheek, his chest rising and falling as he struggled to catch his breath. For a moment, they clung to each other, taking comfort in the warmth and solidity of their bodies. As they climbed higher, the snowy peaks of the Swiss Alps fell away beneath them, the compound receding into the distance until it was little more than a speck on the vast expanse of white. Jade stared out the window. They infiltrated the heart of the Illuminated Order's power structure, witnessed the ruthlessness of their inner circle, and barely escaped with their lives. The memory of the Grand Master's cold eyes staring into hers sent a shiver through Jade's body, and she tightened her grip on David's hand. She leaned her head against his shoulder, drawing strength from his presence. Together, they watched as the snowy peaks gave way to rolling hills and lush valleys, the world below them a patchwork of green and gold. They looked out over the breathtaking landscape, their hearts filled with a new sense of purpose. They survived this battle, but the war was just beginning. Chapter 43. Jade was hunched over the desk in their hotel room, her fingers flying across the keyboard with a frantic urgency. The flash drive she risked everything to obtain was plugged into the laptop, its secrets spilling out before her. She'd been sifting through the files for hours, her eyes straining against the glare of the screen as she tried to make sense of it all. Financial records, encrypted emails, grainy photographs. Each new piece of information only seemed to deepen the mystery, to pull her further down the rabbit hole of conspiracy and corruption. A photograph, buried deep in a nest of encrypted folders, caught her attention. It was a group shot, a gathering of suited men and women with faces that exuded power and prestige. They stood in a lavish ballroom, their smiles cold and calculating beneath the luxurious chandeliers. But it was the man at the center of the group that drew Jade's eye, a man that was both familiar and utterly foreign to her. It was her father, his face lined with a kind of cruel satisfaction that she'd never seen before. and standing at his side with a hand resting possessively on his shoulder was Victoria Sterling. A wave of nausea rose up from the pit of Jade's stomach and her eyes filled with tears. It just can't be. Her father had secrets, parts of his life he kept hidden from her. But this was beyond anything she could have imagined. With trembling fingers, she clicked through to the next file, a spreadsheet filled with numbers and names. Among that complex web of shell corporations and offshore accounts was a name that made her feel numb all over. Ether Entertainment. Her father's company. The business he built from the ground up. The company that brought joy and wonder to millions. There it was, in black and white. Irrefutable proof of his involvement with the Illuminated Order. Payments funneled through a dizzying array of front companies. Donations made to secret organizations with names that sent quivers through Jade's body. Her father, the man she looked up to her entire life, the man whose love and guidance shaped her into the person she was today, was a monster. I don't believe this is happening. A liar, a manipulator, a puppet master pulling the strings of the world from behind the scenes. And she, Jade, had been his unwitting pawn, a tool to be used and discarded in the service of his twisted agenda. Tears rushed down her face as she stared at the screen, her vision blurring with a kind of raw, visceral pain she had never known before. Everything she ever believed, every truth she ever held dear, was crumbling to dust before her eyes. She sank into a chair, her legs no longer able to support her weight, her mind racing, trying to reconcile the image of her loving, supportive father with the cold, ruthless woman that stared back at her. Tears stung her eyes, a hot, prickling sensation that blurred her vision and made her throat ache with the effort of holding back a sob. How could he have kept this from me? How could he have lied to me for all these years, pretending to be someone he wasn't? The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound, a singeing pain that radiated from her heart and left her feeling hollow and empty inside. All the times she confided in him, all the moments of laughter and love they shared, she wondered if any of it was real. Her mind flashed back to her childhood, to the long walks in the park and the bedtime stories he would read to her each night. She always seen him as her hero, her protector, the one person she could count on to be there for her. But now, as she sat in the ruins of her shattered illusions, she realized she never knew him at all. The man she called her father was a stranger. Jade's hands trembled as she reached for her phone, her fingers hovering over the keypad. She knew she should call him, confront him with the truth, and demand an explanation. But the thought of hearing his voice, of seeing the lies and the deceit written across his face, was more than she could bear. She closed her eyes, her heart aching with the weight of the decision she knew she had to make. She had to confront him, had to look him in the eye and ask him why he betrayed her, why he chose the Order over his own family. But as she prepared herself for the confrontation to come, she knew nothing would ever be the same again. The trust that had once been the foundation of their relationship was shattered, the bond between father and daughter forever tainted by the poison of the Illuminated Order. Jade's father, Weston Rose, always dreamed of making it big in the music industry. Born and raised in the South Bronx, he had a natural talent for crafting beats and lyrics that spoke to the struggles and aspirations of his community. But despite his undeniable skills and tireless hustle, he found himself trapped in a cycle of dead-end jobs and broken promises, his dreams of stardom always just out of reach. It was in the late 1980s, during a low point in his life, when Weston first crossed paths with Victoria Sterling. She approached him after a small gig at a local club, her designer dress and expensive jewelry standing out against the grimy surroundings. She introduced herself as a talent scout with connections to the biggest labels in the business, and she had an offer that was too good to be true. Victoria promised Weston everything he ever wanted: a record company, worldwide tours, money, fame, and influence. But there was a catch. In exchange for her help, Weston would have to pledge his allegiance to a powerful organization known as the Illuminated Order. He would become a part of their inner circle, privy to their secrets and their plans for the world. At first, Weston was hesitant. He heard whispers of the Order before, rumors of a secret organization that pulled strings behind the scenes. But Victoria was persuasive, painting a picture of a future filled with wealth and adoration, a life where he could have everything he ever dreamed of. In a moment of weakness, Weston agreed. He took the oath, swearing his loyalty to the Order and its Grand Master. And just like that, his fate was sealed. As he rose through the ranks of the music industry, Weston began to understand the true nature of his bargain. The Order had a plan, a sinister agenda to shape the minds and hearts of the youth through the power of music. They wanted to promote violence, to stir up chaos and unrest, to create a generation of angry, disillusioned young people who could be easily controlled and manipulated. Weston was a key player in this plan. The music, once a source of hope and inspiration, became a tool of the Order's propaganda machine. His artist crafted lyrics that glorified gang violence, drug use, and misogyny. It was a dark, seductive energy that drew in listeners by the millions. Behind the scenes, the Order was working to capitalize on the chaos they were creating. They had investments in private prison systems, in security firms and weapons manufacturers. The more violence and unrest there was on the streets, the more money they stood to make. Weston was sickened by what he'd become, by the knowledge that his music was being used to harm the same people he once sought to uplift. But he was in too deep, trapped by his oath and the fear of what the Order would do to him if he tried to back out. As the years went by, Weston watched as his daughter Jade grew up, a bright and inquisitive child with a thirst for truth and justice. He knew she would never understand the choices he made, the compromises he accepted in the pursuit of his dreams. He tried to shield her from the darkness of his world, to give her a life of love and stability despite the turmoil that raged inside of him. But someday, the truth would come out. And when it did, he could only hope Jade would find the strength to forgive him, to understand the impossible choices he faced. For Weston Rose, the price of fame and fortune had been his soul, his integrity, and his family. Sitting at the edge of the bed in the hotel room, Jade wanted to give up. The weight of the last few days, of all the horrors she witnessed and the sacrifices she made, left her emotionally numb. Beside her, David's face was lined with exhaustion and grief. He lost friends and allies in this fight, seen the true depths of human depravity and cruelty. But he couldn't give up. He had to keep fighting for the sake of all that was good and true in the world. "Jade," he said, "we can't let them win. We can't let the Illuminated Order's evil go unchallenged." Jade looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed and filled with sadness. "I know," she said, her voice hoarse and broken. "But David, the things we've seen, the things we've had to do, I don't know if I can keep going. I don't know if I have the strength." David reached out and took her hand. "You're one of the strongest people I know, Jade. You've been through so much, sacrificed so much, but you're still here, still fighting. That takes a kind of strength that most people can only dream of." A smile came across Jade's lips, her heart swelling with gratitude for David's support. But even as she savored the warmth of his touch and the comfort of his words, grief and despair washed over her, threatening to drag her down into the depths of hopelessness. "David, there's something I need to tell you. Something I found out about my father." "What is it?" Jade took a deep, shuddering breath, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. "My father," she said. "He's involved with the Illuminated Order. He's been using his position in the entertainment industry to spread their propaganda, to influence the minds of the youth and lead them down a path of destruction." David's eyes widened. He'd always known the Illuminated Order's reach was long and insidious, but to think they infiltrated even the highest levels of the entertainment industry, and were using it to corrupt and mislead an entire generation. "Jade, I'm so sorry. I can't even imagine how you must be feeling right now." Jade shook her head, her eyes brimming with fresh tears. "I feel like I don't even know him anymore. Like everything I thought I knew about him was a lie. And the worst part is, I don't know if he's just a pawn in their game, or if he's been a willing participant all along." David reached out and pulled Jade into his arms, holding her close as she wept against his chest. There were no words that could ease the pain of such a profound betrayal, no platitudes that could make sense of the deceit and manipulation the Illuminated Order had woven. But they had to find a way to keep fighting no matter how much it hurt. For the sake of all the innocent lives that hung in the balance, and for the sake of the world they swore to protect. "We'll get through this, Jade," he whispered, his voice fierce with determination. "We'll find a way to stop the Illuminated Order, to expose their lies and bring them to justice. And we'll do it together, no matter what it takes." Jade clung to him, her tears soaking into the fabric of his shirt. "You're right," she said. "We can't let them win. We have to keep fighting, no matter what it takes. For the sake of everyone we love, and for the sake of the world we want to create."